In the darkest corners of the galaxy, where survival means turning away from other suffering, one human woman will discover that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in saving yourself. It's in refusing to let innocence die on your watch. When Dr. Sarah Chun encounters a dying alien mother's desperate plea to save her child, she faces an impossible choice: preserve her own safety in a hostile universe, or risk everything for a species that might never understand her sacrifice. What happens when humanity's greatest weakness, our inability to ignore suffering, becomes our most dangerous strength? In a galaxy where compassion is seen as stupidity and mercy as madness, one woman's choice to help will trigger events that reshape how the universe sees the human race forever. Some say humans are too soft for space. They're about to learn just how terrifyingly wrong they are. The emergency beacon cut through the static of dead space like a knife through silence. Dr. Sarah Chen's fingers hesitated over the communication console of her small research vessel, the Wanderer. 3 years of working the Outer Rim had taught her that responding to distress calls was often a death sentence. Pirates used fake beacons to lure good-hearted fools into traps. Slavers did the same. But the signal was coming from a Kithran ship. Sarah stared at the readings on her scanner, her breath catching in her throat. Kithrans were one of the most feared species in the galaxy. Towering, reptilian predators with razor-sharp claws and a reputation for violence that made even hardened pirates think twice. Their ships were heavily armed fortresses that could reduce her small vessel to cosmic dust without effort. What could possibly have happened to force them to broadcast an emergency signal? "Computer, analyze the beacon transmission," she said, her voice barely above a whisper in the cramped cockpit. The artificial intelligence hummed for a moment before responding in its calm, synthetic voice. "Signal originates from Kithran heavy cruiser, designation Blood Talon. Ship appears to be adrift. No weapons signatures detected. Hull integrity compromised in multiple sections." Sarah pulled up the visual feed on her main screen. The Blood Talon hung in space like a broken toy, its massive bulk scarred by what looked like weapons fire. Sections of the hull were completely missing, revealing twisted metal and darkened corridors within. Whatever had attacked this ship had been powerful enough to cripple one of the most dangerous vessels in known space. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to fire up her engines and jump to the nearest safe system. Humans were barely tolerated in most of the galaxy, seen as weak newcomers who had stumbled into space travel only a few centuries ago. Getting involved with Kithran affairs would be suicide. But the beacon kept transmitting, and something in its desperate pulse made her hesitate. "Computer, can you decode the specific distress message?" "Translating now." A pause. Message reads, "Ship dying. Life support failing. Young ones in danger. Any who hear this, please help. We cannot save them ourselves. Young ones. Children." Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought of her own childhood, of being small and helpless, of the adults who had protected her when she couldn't protect herself. She thought of her oath as a doctor, the promise to help those in need regardless of who they were. She thought of her parents, killed by raiders when she was 16, and how no one had come to help them. "Computer, prepare the medical bay for multiple casualties. Unknown species, so make sure all the adaptable equipment is ready." "Dr. Chun, I must advise against this course of action. Kithrans are known to be extremely aggressive. This could be a trap." "I know," Sarah said, her hands already moving to the navigation controls. "But I'm a doctor. I took an oath." The Wanderer moved toward the crippled Kithran vessel with careful precision. Sarah kept her weapons powered down, not that they would do much good against a ship that size anyway, and broadcast a response to the distress beacon in broken Kithran. "This is Dr. Sarah Chun of the medical vessel Wanderer. I am responding to your distress call. I am a healer. Please do not fire upon my ship." For long minutes, there was no response. Sarah's small ship drifted closer to the massive cruiser, and she could see the extent of the damage more clearly. Entire sections had been blown away, and she could see bodies floating in the vacuum around the ship. Whatever had happened here, it had been a massacre. Finally, a weak voice crackled through her communications array. It spoke in heavily accented standard, the universal trade language. "Human ship, you should not be here. This place is death." "I'm a doctor," Sarah repeated. "Your beacon said young ones were in danger. I can help." A long pause. "Then, you are very small human. Very weak. Why do you come a place of death for strangers?" Sarah found herself smiling grimly. Because someone has to. Another pause, longer this time. Then the voice came back, somehow different. Sadder. You may dock at base 7. But, know this, small human, we cannot protect you here. The attackers may return. You risk your life for those who cannot even thank you properly. I understand. Sarah guided her ship toward the docking bay, her hands steady despite the fear gnawing at her stomach. The Wanderer was tiny compared to the Kithaeron ship, like a minnow swimming up to a dying whale. The docking bay was damaged, but still functional, its magnetic clamps engaging with a solid thunk that echoed through both ships. As Sarah prepared to board the alien vessel, she checked her equipment one more time. Her medical kit was fully stocked with broad-spectrum medicines and emergency surgical tools. Her portable atmosphere generator would keep her breathing in environments toxic to humans. Her universal translator was set to Kithaeron dialects. What she didn't have was any kind of serious weapon, just a small stunner that might annoy a Kithaeron if she was lucky. The airlock cycled, and Sarah stepped into a nightmare. The corridor beyond was filled with smoke and the stench of burnt electronics. Emergency lighting cast everything in a hellish red glow. Bodies lay scattered along the deck. Massive Kithaeron warriors who had died defending their ship. Their blood was a dark purple color that pooled in the low gravity, and their normally fearsome features were peaceful in death. Dr. Human. The voice from the communicator came from behind her. Sarah turned and came face to face with a Kithaeron warrior. She had seen pictures, of course, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. The alien stood nearly 9 feet tall, covered in scales that shifted from deep green to black in the red light. His arms were as thick as her waist, ending in hands that could easily crush her skull. His face was elongated like a crocodile's, filled with teeth that could tear through steel. But his eyes held intelligence and a grief that was completely human. "I am Ship Leader Thrak," he said in careful standard. "You should not have come. Where are the injured?" Sarah asked, shouldering her medical kit. Thrak stared at her for a moment, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Then, he gestured down the corridor with one massive claw. "This way." But, human, the attackers were hegemony forces. They will return to finish what they started. They do not leave witnesses. Sarah had heard of the hegemony, a coalition of older species who believed that newer spacefaring races should be kept in their place. They have been responsible for several attacks on human colonies in recent years. "How long do we have?" she asked, following Thrak through the devastated ship. "Perhaps 2 hours. Maybe less." They moved through corridors filled with damage and death. The ship's environmental systems were failing, and Sarah could feel the temperature dropping with each step. Her breath began to fog in the thin air. "How many survivors?" she asked. 12 adults. 3 young ones." Thrak's voice was heavy with grief. "We had 40 young ones when the attack began." Sarah felt her heart clench. Children. Always the children who suffered most. They reached what had once been the ship's medical bay. It was a large space, now filled with wounded Kithaeryns lying on makeshift beds. The ship's doctor was dead, killed in the first moments of the attack, and the survivors had done what they could with limited knowledge. It wasn't enough. Sarah moved from patient to patient, her scanner analyzing their conditions. The Kithaeryns watched her with suspicious eyes, but none tried to stop her. Their injuries were severe: plasma burns, decompression damage, internal bleeding from impacts. Several were dying. "Your medical supplies?" she asked Thrak. "Destroyed or contaminated?" "We have been using emergency kits only." Sarah nodded and began to work. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, connecting 4 lines filled with broad-spectrum healing compounds, applying regenerative patches to wounds, stabilizing internal injuries with microsurgical techniques. The Kithaeryns were unlike any species she had worked on before. Their biology was incredibly robust. They could survive injuries that would kill a human instantly. But they were also complex with redundant organ systems and a circulatory structure that defied easy understanding. She lost the first patient within minutes, a young warrior whose injuries were simply too severe. But she saved the second and the third, working her way through the wounded with mechanical precision. "Doctor," Thrak said quietly, "the young ones are in the next chamber." Sarah followed him through another damaged doorway and stopped short. 3 small Kithaeryns huddled together in the corner of what had been a nursery. They were perhaps the size of human 10-year-olds, but their scales were brighter, more colorful than the adults. their large eyes fixed on her with a mixture of fear and curiosity. One of them was dying. Sarah could see it immediately, the way the small alien's breathing was labored, the pale tinge to its usually vibrant scales. Internal injuries, severe enough to be fatal within hours without treatment. The little one was caught in a decompression event, Thrak explained. Our young do not survive such trauma well. Sarah knelt beside the injured child, ignoring the way the other two hissed and bared their small but sharp teeth. Her scanner revealed massive internal bleeding and damage to organs she couldn't even identify. This will require surgery, she said. Major surgery. I'll need to open the chest cavity. You would do this? Thrak asked, surprise clear in his voice. Risk your life for a Kithrin young one. Sarah looked up at him, then back at the child. It's what I do. She began to set up her portable surgical unit, working quickly but carefully. The other survivors had gathered in the doorway, watching silently as the small human prepared to operate on their young. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, but she pushed the pressure aside and focused on her patient. The child's breathing was getting worse. I need to begin now, she said. The bleeding is accelerating. Thrak nodded and knelt beside the young one, speaking in rapid Kithrin. The child's eyes fixed on Sarah's face, and for a moment she saw past the alien features to the universal fear of a child in pain. It's going to be okay, she said softly, though she knew the young Kithrin probably couldn't understand her. I'm going to help you. Sarah activated her surgical field and began to work. The child anatomy was unlike anything she had studied, but the principles of trauma surgery were universal. Find the bleeding, stop it, repair what could be repaired, stabilize what couldn't. Her hands moved with practiced precision, guided by real-time scans and years of experience. Around her, the ship continued to die, life support systems failing one by one. But in this small bubble of medical technology, she fought for one small life. The surgery took over an hour. Sarah's back ached from bending over the portable table, and her hands were cramped from the delicate work. But slowly, gradually, the child's vital signs stabilized. The bleeding has stopped, she announced, sitting back on her heels. The organ damage was extensive, but I've repaired what I could. The young one should survive. A sound went up from the gathered Kithrins. Not quite a cheer, but something like relief mixed with amazement. Thrak was staring at Sarah as if he had never seen anything like her before. You have saved a life that was surely lost, he said quietly. This is unexpected. Sarah was cleaning her instruments when the ship's alarms began to sound. Thrak immediately stood, his head tilted as he listened to the rapid Kithrin announcements echoing through the corridors. What is it? Sarah asked. Though she was afraid, she already knew. Hegemony ships, Thrak said grimly. 3 heavy cruisers. They have found us. Sarah looked down at her patient, still unconscious but breathing steadily. The other 2 children pressed closer together, their large eyes wide with fear. The wounded Kithrins in the medical bay would never survive another battle. How long until they arrive? She asked. 15 minutes. Maybe 20. Sarah stood and began packing her equipment. We need to evacuate the survivors to my ship. Thrak shook his massive head. Your vessel is too small. It cannot hold us all, and it cannot outrun hegemony cruisers. Then what do you suggest? Thrak was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the young one Sarah had just saved. When he looked back at her, his expression was unreadable. There's a way, he said slowly, but it would require you to trust us completely. And it would mean certain death for any hegemony forces that try to stop us. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the failing life support. What kind of way? Kithrin ships carry quantum fusion charges as a last resort. If we cannot escape, we ensure our enemies do not benefit from our defeat. Sarah stared at him, the implications sinking in. You're talking about suicide. For us, yes. But your ship could escape in the chaos. And the children? Thrak's expression softened slightly. Would die with honor, as Kithrin young should. Sarah looked down at the child she had just spent an hour saving, then at the other 2 who huddled together in fear. She thought of her oath as a doctor, of her promise to do no harm. She thought of the hegemony ships approaching, carrying enough firepower to ensure none of them would survive anyway. And she thought of something else, something that might just be crazy enough to work. Thrak, she said quietly, do you trust me? The massive alien studied her face for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. You came here knowing you might die to save strangers. Yes, human doctor. I trust you. Sarah took a deep breath and began to explain her plan. Outside, 3 hegemony cruisers closed in on their position, ready to finish what they had started. But inside the dying Kithrin ship, a human doctor was about to show the galaxy exactly what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge. You want to do what? Thrak's voice carried a note of disbelief that transcended species barriers. Sarah was already moving, gathering specific equipment from her medical kit, while her mind raced through the calculations. It's called induced hibernation therapy. We use it on Earth for extreme trauma cases where the patient's body needs time to heal without the stress of consciousness. You speak of making us sleep, another Kithrin warrior said, his voice thick with suspicion, while enemies approach to kill us all. Not just sleep, Sarah explained, pulling out a collection of small devices that looked more like jewelry than medical equipment. Complete metabolic suspension. Your bodies will enter a state so deep that life signs will be virtually undetectable. Heart rate drops to less than 1 beat per minute. Brain activity falls to levels that most scanners read as death. Thrak's eyes narrowed. And you believe this will fool hegemony sensors? It's our only chance, Sarah said, connecting her portable medical computer to the ship's remaining power systems. The hegemony wants to make sure there are no survivors. They'll scan for life signs, find nothing, and move on. But we need to move fast. The ship shuddered as the approaching hegemony vessels began targeting scans. Warning alarms echoed through the corridors, announcing the inevitable approach of death. The process is dangerous, Sarah continued, working rapidly to configure her equipment. There's always a risk that the subject won't wake up, but it's better than the certainty of dying when those ships arrive. Thrak looked around at his people, wounded warriors who could barely stand, elders whose scales had dulled with age and injury, and the 3 young ones who watched everything with wide, frightened eyes. How long can this sleep last? He asked. Safely? About 6 hours for your species, based on my analysis of your biology. After that, I need to administer revival stimulants, or there could be permanent damage. And you would stay awake? Alone, while we are helpless? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Someone has to monitor the process. Someone has to be ready to wake everyone up when the coast is clear. Another warrior, this one missing an arm from the earlier battle, spoke up. Human, what makes you think we should trust you with our lives? Your species is known for weakness, for betraying others to save themselves. Because, Sarah said simply, I came here in the first place. Thrak was quiet for a long moment, studying the small human woman who had somehow taken charge of their desperate situation. Around them, the ship continued to die, and the approaching hegemony vessels grew closer with each passing second. If we do this, he said finally, and the hegemony discovers us while we sleep, then I'll wake you up, and we'll fight, Sarah replied. But this gives us a chance. Maybe the only one we're going to get. The ship's communications system crackled to life with a new voice, cold, mechanical, speaking in the harsh tones of hegemony standard. Kithrin vessel blood Talon, you are ordered to prepare for boarding. Any resistance will result in immediate destruction. You have 2 minutes to comply. Thrak's expression hardened. Decide now, human doctor. We're out of time. Sarah was already moving, attaching the hibernation inductors to the nearest wounded warrior. Everyone needs to lie down. The transition will be easier if you're already prone. The Kithrins began to position themselves around the medical bay, their movements slow and painful. Sarah worked quickly, attaching the small devices to each alien's neck, where major nerve clusters would allow the inductors to interface directly with their nervous systems. The young ones first, she said, moving toward the 3 children. Their smaller bodies will transition faster. The injured child she had operated on was still unconscious, making the attachment simple. The other 2 watched her with those large, intelligent eyes as she approached. I need you to trust me, she said softly, knowing they probably couldn't understand her words, but hoping they could read her tone. I'm going to help you sleep until the bad things go away. One of the young Kithrins, a female with particularly bright blue-green scales, chittered something in rapid Kithrin. Thrak translated. She asked if you will be sleeping too. Sarah shook her head. Tell her that someone has to stay awake to keep everyone safe. Tell her I'll be here when she wakes up. Thrak spoke to the young ones in their native language, his voice gentle despite the urgent situation. Both children nodded and lay down side by side, allowing Sarah to attach the inductors. It will feel strange at first, Sarah explained to the room at large. Like falling asleep very quickly. Don't fight it. Let your minds drift. She activated the first inductor. The young female's eyes widened for a moment, then slowly drifted closed. Her breathing deepened and slowed, her heart rate dropping to levels that would have been alarming in a human, but were perfectly normal for the hibernation process. One by one, Sarah worked through the survivors. The warriors were the most difficult. Their instincts fought against the induced unconsciousness, making the process take longer than she had hoped. But eventually, even the most stubborn fighter succumbed to the medical hibernation. Thrak was the last. "Human doctor," he said as Sarah approached with the final inductor. "If this fails, if we do not wake." "You will," Sarah said firmly. "I promise." "And if the hegemony discovers you?" Sarah's smile was grim. "Then they'll learn that humans can be very unpleasant when they're protecting something important." Thrak's expression was unreadable as he lay back on one of the makeshift beds. "You are a strange species, humans. Weak in body, but perhaps not in spirit." Sarah attached the final inductor and activated it. Thrak's massive form relaxed, his breathing slowing until it was barely perceptible. Within moments, the medical bay was silent except for the distant groaning of the dying ship. Sarah was alone with 15 hibernating Kithrans and 3 approaching hegemony cruisers. She moved quickly to her portable computer, adjusting the hibernation monitoring systems and setting up automated alerts. If any of her patients showed signs of distress, she would know immediately. Then, she began the most dangerous part of her plan. Sarah made her way through the damaged ship to the bridge, where the main computer systems were still partially functional. Her fingers flew over the alien controls, grateful for the universal design principles that made most Starship interfaces at least partially comprehensible. She needed to make the blood talon look completely dead. Working with systems she barely understood, Sarah began shutting down the remaining life support networks, the emergency power grids, even the basic environmental controls. The ship's computer protested each shutdown with warning messages in Kithran, but she overrode them all. Within minutes, the massive vessel was truly derelict, floating in space with no signs of active systems. The only power came from Sarah's own equipment, carefully shielded and running on internal batteries. The hegemony ships arrived with the precision of military vessels accustomed to victory. Sarah watched them through a damaged viewport, 3 sleek cruisers that moved with predatory grace around the crippled Kithran ship. Her universal translator picked up their communications as they scanned the blood talon. "No active life signs detected," one voice reported. "All primary systems appear to have failed." "Confirmed," another replied. "Internal atmosphere has vented. Any survivors would be dead by now." Sarah held her breath as the sensors swept through the ship. The hibernating Kithran's life signs were so faint that they barely registered on her own medical scanners. Hopefully, they would be invisible to the hegemony's military-grade sensors as well. "Ship appears to be a total loss," the first voice concluded. "Valuable salvage, but no intelligence value." "Orders?" There was a pause. Then a new voice, colder and more authoritative. "Mark the coordinates for salvage retrieval. We have other objectives to complete." Sarah's hands were shaking as she watched the 3 hegemony vessels begin to move away from the blood talon. The plan was working. They believed the ship was dead, its crew gone, nothing worth their immediate attention. But as the cruisers began to accelerate toward whatever their next target might be, one of them suddenly stopped. Sarah's blood went cold as she watched the ship turn back toward them, its sensors sweeping the blood talon with renewed intensity. "Wait," came the voice over the communications array. "I'm detecting trace energy signatures. Residual heat patterns that don't match total system failure." "Explain." "Something on that ship is still active. Something small, but definitely functional." Sarah looked down at her medical equipment, realizing with growing horror that her hibernation monitoring system was probably generating exactly the kind of energy signature the hegemony sensors would detect. She had been so focused on masking life signs that she had forgotten about the equipment itself. "Prepare boarding teams," the hegemony commander ordered. "I want that ship searched compartment by compartment. If there are survivors, find them." Sarah moved as quickly and quietly as she could back toward the medical bay, her mind racing. She had perhaps 10 minutes before hegemony Marines would be aboard the blood talon. 10 minutes to figure out how to protect 15 helpless Kithrans from discovery and execution. Her first instinct was to power down all her medical equipment and hope the hegemony soldiers would miss the hibernating aliens in a cursory search. But without the monitoring systems, she had no way of knowing if her patients were stable. Several of them were critically injured. Losing medical support could kill them as surely as enemy weapons. Then, she remembered something Thrak had mentioned. Something about Kitharin ships carrying quantum fusion charges as a last resort. Sarah made her way through the damaged corridors to what remained of the ship's weapons control center. The main systems were destroyed, but the emergency protocols were still accessible. She stared at the alien controls, trying to decipher the functions. There, the fusion charges, powerful enough to vaporize the entire ship and anything within a considerable radius. The ultimate dead man's switch. But Sarah wasn't planning to use them for suicide. She began carefully reprogramming the charge sequences, working with system interfaces that were as much guesswork as knowledge. What she needed was a controlled detonation, something that would convince the hegemony forces that the ship was destroying itself while actually doing minimal damage. It was incredibly dangerous. One wrong calculation, and she would vaporize everyone, including herself. But as she worked, Sarah realized she had another option. Something even more dangerous, but potentially more effective. The Kitharins were known throughout the galaxy for their fierce warrior culture, their refusal to surrender, their willingness to die rather than be captured. That reputation could be a weapon in itself. Sarah activated the ship's communications array and opened a channel to the approaching hegemony vessels. Hegemony forces, she said, disguising her voice with the ship's audio processors to sound deeper, more alien. This is the Blood Talon. You will not take us alive. There was a moment of confused silence. Then, the hegemony commander responded. Kitharin vessel, our scans indicated no life signs aboard your ship. Your scans are inferior, Sarah replied, trying to channel every ounce of Kitharin arrogance she had ever encountered. We live, and we choose death before dishonor. Stand down immediately. Prepare for boarding. Never. Sarah's fingers hovered over the fusion charge controls. What she was about to do would either save them all or kill them all. There was no middle ground. You have 30 seconds to withdraw, she continued, or we will detonate our fusion charges. This ship and all aboard will join our ancestors in glory, and your vessels will burn with us. She could hear rapid conversations among the hegemony crews as they tried to decide whether the threat was real. Sarah used the time to make final adjustments to the charge sequence. A partial detonation that would damage the ship's superstructure, but leave the medical bay intact. Probably. Kitharin vessel, you are bluffing. Scans continue to show minimal life signs. Then, scan this, Sarah said, and triggered the charges. The explosion tore through the forward sections of the Blood Talon, venting atmosphere and debris into space. Emergency alarms screamed through the corridors as the ship's hull twisted under the strain. But the medical bay, protected by multiple bulkheads and Sarah's careful calculations, remained intact. Through the damaged viewport, Sarah watched the hegemony vessels react to the detonation. They had pulled back to a safe distance, clearly surprised by the ferocity of what they believed was a suicide attack. Target destroyed, one voice reported. No survivors possible. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she monitored the hibernating Kitharins. All vital signs remained stable, though the explosion had triggered several medical alerts that she quickly silenced. The hegemony ships held position for another hour, scanning the wreckage and debris field to make sure their mission was complete. Finally, satisfied that nothing could have survived the detonation, they moved on to whatever other objectives awaited them. Sarah was alone in the dark with 15 sleeping aliens, drifting in a crippled ship that was now genuinely dying around them. Life support was failing, hull integrity was compromised, and she had maybe 4 hours before the hibernation process needed to be reversed. But they were alive. Hidden in the wreckage of their own ship, invisible to their enemies, they had survived. Now came the hardest part, staying alive long enough for rescue to arrive. The first sign of trouble came 3 hours after the hegemony ships had departed. Sarah was monitoring the hibernating Kitharins when her portable scanner detected an atmospheric leak in the medical bay. Nothing dramatic. Just a slow hiss of air escaping through a hairline crack in the bulkhead that the explosion had weakened. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't have been a problem. The ship's emergency systems would have sealed the breach automatically. But The Blood Talon's emergency systems were dead, along with most everything else that had kept the vessel habitable. Sarah had perhaps 2 hours of breathable atmosphere remaining before carbon dioxide buildup became lethal. She could extend that time by reducing her own activity, breathing slowly and shallowly to conserve oxygen. But the hibernating Kithrans, even in their reduced metabolic state, were still consuming air. And in another hour, she would need to begin the revival process, whether the atmosphere situation was resolved or not. Working by the light of her medical scanner, Sarah made her way through the damaged ship to find repair materials. The corridors were even more treacherous now, with new debris scattered by the explosion she had triggered. Twisted metal jutted from the walls at head height, and the deck plating had buckled in several places. But she found what she needed in an emergency supply locker, a patch kit designed for minor hull breaches. The alien writing on the package was incomprehensible, but the pictographs were universal enough. Expose adhesive surface, apply to breach, activate molecular bonding field. The repair took 20 minutes of careful work in the dim emergency lighting. Sarah had to position herself at an awkward angle to reach the crack, and the bulkhead was still warm from the explosion. But gradually, the hiss of escaping air faded to silence. One crisis solved, several more waiting. When she returned to the medical bay, Sarah discovered that one of the injured warriors was showing signs of distress. His hibernation readings were fluctuating, heart rate climbing toward dangerous levels. She checked his medical file on her scanner, reviewing the treatment she had provided earlier. Plasma burns across 60% of his body, internal bleeding that she had managed to stop, and what appeared to be a severe concussion from being thrown against a bulkhead during the attack. The hibernation process was supposed to give his body time to heal, but something was going wrong. Sarah pulled up the detailed readouts, her medical training taking over despite the alien physiology she was dealing with. The warrior's brain activity was spiking, not the gentle waves of natural sleep, but the sharp, erratic patterns of extreme stress or pain. She was losing him. Working quickly, Sarah adjusted the hibernation inductor, trying to deepen the unconscious state without pushing the alien system into complete shutdown. It was delicate work, made more difficult by her incomplete understanding of Kithra neurology. The readings stabilized for a moment, then began climbing again. Sarah made a decision that went against every principle of careful medicine she had been taught. She reached in her kit for a powerful sedative compound, something that should never be used on a patient whose brain chemistry she didn't fully understand. But the alternative was watching him die. She administered the injection through the hibernation inductor's 4-line, calculating the dosage based on the warrior's body mass, and hoping her analysis of his species' metabolism was accurate. For a terrifying moment, his vital signs flatlined. Sarah's hands moved to her emergency revival equipment, ready to bring him out of hibernation and attempt resuscitation. Then his heart rate resumed, slow and steady. The brain activity settled into the gentle patterns of deep unconsciousness. Sarah sat back on her heels, shaking with relief and delayed fear. She had gambled with an alien life and won, but the margin of error had been terrifyingly small. That was when her scanner detected the new ships approaching. Sarah's blood ran cold as she watched the sensor readings. For vessels, moving with the precise formation of a military patrol. For a moment, she thought the hegemony forces had returned to investigate the wreckage more thoroughly. But these ships were different. Smaller, faster, and broadcasting identification codes that her translator couldn't immediately parse. Sarah made her way back to the bridge, moving as carefully as possible through the damaged corridors. The last thing she needed was to trigger another hull breach by disturbing the wrong piece of debris. The ships were close enough now for visual identification. Sarah's heart leaped as she recognized their configuration. Sleek, predatory vessels with the distinctive wing patterns of Kithran fighter cruisers. Rescuers. But how had they found the Blood Talon? The answer came as Sarah activated the ship's passive sensors. The lead Kithran vessel was broadcasting on emergency frequencies, calling for any survivors of the Blood Talon to respond. Sarah hesitated. Responding would reveal their position to any hostile forces that might be monitoring communications. But the approaching ships were flying Kithran military codes, and they were actively searching for survivors. She opened a channel on the tightest possible beam, directing her transmission only to the lead vessel. Kithran Rescue Force. This is Dr. Sarah Chun aboard the Blood Talon. I have 15 survivors in medical hibernation. Approach with caution. Ship is heavily damaged and unstable. The response came back immediately, in accented but clear standard. Dr. Chun, this is War Leader Korvax of the Kithran Defense Fleet. Explain your situation. Our scouts reported this ship destroyed with all hands. The destruction was exaggerated. I used the ship's fusion charges to simulate total destruction while keeping the survivors in hibernation. We have been hidden in the wreckage for 3 hours. There was a long pause. Then Korvax's voice returned, carrying a note of amazement. You are the human doctor who responded to ship leader Thrak's distress call. Yes. How did you? Thrak is my clutch brother, Korvax said, using a Kithran term that Sarah's translator rendered as something between sibling and bloodsworn companion. When his ship failed to report to our rendezvous, we began searching. We found the debris field and we assumed we were too late. Thrak is alive, Sarah said quickly. Injured but stable. All the survivors are stable, but I need to begin revival procedures within the next hour. Understood. We are beginning approach now. Can your ship support docking procedures? Sarah looked around at the twisted wreckage of the bridge, the failing systems, the signs of structural damage everywhere. Negative. This ship is barely holding together. Any major stress could cause complete structural failure. Then, we will have to do this the difficult way. Prepare for emergency evacuation. We will bring boarding pods alongside and transfer your survivors manually. The hibernated patients can't be moved safely without proper medical support, Sarah protested. The shock of transportation could kill them. Then, we will bring our medical bay to them. What followed was the most complex rescue operation Sarah had ever witnessed. The Kithran ships maneuvered with incredible precision, bringing a specialized medical transport alongside the Blood Talon's damaged hull. Cutting torches opened a new docking port directly into the medical bay, and Kithran medics in full environmental suits began the delicate process of transferring the hibernating survivors. Sarah worked alongside the alien medical team, explaining the hibernation process and monitoring each patient as they were moved to proper medical facilities. The Kithran's technology was more advanced than her own portable equipment, but they treated her improvised medical procedures with something approaching reverence. You understand, one of the senior medics said to her as they transferred the young Kithran she had operated on, that this hibernation technique of yours is completely unknown to our medicine. I wasn't sure it would work on your species, Sarah admitted. I had to adapt it from human procedures. You experimented on living patients with untested procedures. The medic's tone was unreadable. I experimented on dying patients who had no other options, Sarah corrected. The choice was between certain death and possible survival. The medic was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. You chose correctly, human doctor. All of these lives would have been lost without your intervention. The transfer took nearly 2 hours. Each hibernating Kithran had to be moved carefully, with full medical support maintained throughout the process. Sarah found herself working seamlessly with the alien medical team, her human training complementing their advanced technology. The last to be moved was Thrak. As the Kithran medics prepared him for transfer, War Leader Korvax entered the medical bay. He was even larger than Thrak, his scales a darker shade of green that spoke of advanced age and battle experience. His eyes fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her acutely aware of how small and fragile she was in comparison. Human doctor, he said formally, I must ask why you risked your life to save Kithran warriors. Sarah had been expecting this question, but she still wasn't sure how to answer it. Because they needed help, she said finally. Many species need help. Most humans do not risk themselves for strangers, especially not for Kithrans. We are known to be difficult allies. Maybe, Sarah said, watching as Thrak's unconscious form was carefully loaded onto a medical transport. But I'm a doctor. I took an oath to preserve life wherever I found it. Korvax studied her for a long moment. You understand that this incident will be reported to the Kithran High Command. Your actions will become part of our official records. Is that a bad thing? Sarah asked. That remains to be seen. Come, human doctor. It is time to leave this place of death. Sarah gathered her equipment and followed the war leader through the new breach in the hull. As she stepped aboard the Kithran medical transport, she looked back at the Blood Talon one last time. The massive ship that had once been a symbol of Kithran power and ferocity was now a broken hulk, its corridors dark and cold. But 15 lives have been saved from those corridors. 15 Kithrans who would see their homes again, including 3 young ones who would grow up to tell the story of the strange human doctor who had risked everything to save them. The medical transport sealed its hatches and pulled away from the wreckage. Through the viewports, Sarah could see the other Kithran vessels taking up escort positions around them. She was safer now than she had been in hours. But as they entered hyperspace, heading toward a Kithran military base for proper medical treatment of the survivors, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her real journey was just beginning. In the main medical bay of the transport, Kithran doctors worked to bring the hibernating survivors safely back to consciousness. Sarah assisted where she could, but mostly she watched, fascinated by the aliens' advanced medical techniques. The first awake was one of the young ones, the bright blue-green female who had asked if Sarah would be sleeping too. Her large eyes opened slowly, blinking in the clean white light of the medical bay. When she saw Sarah standing nearby, the young Kithran made a sound, part chirp, part trill, that Sarah's translator rendered as joyful recognition. "The healing human," the young one said in halting standard. "You kept your promise. You stayed awake." Sarah smiled and moved closer to the medical bed. "How are you feeling?" "Different. Strange. But alive." The young Kithran's eyes were bright with curiosity. "The bad ships are gone." "They're gone. You're safe now." The young one reached out with one small, scaled hand. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah took it gently in her own. "My name is Kira," the young Kithran said. "What is yours?" "Sarah. Dr. Sarah Chun. Dr. Sarah Kirareperkarefuli. I will remember this name. When I am grown and strong, I will tell others of the human who saved us from the dark sleep." Around the medical bay, other Kithrans were beginning to stir. Warriors who had been dying from their wounds were sitting up, their injuries healed by the advanced medical treatment they had received. The elderly survivors were moving with new strength, their damaged organs repaired by Kithran regenerative technology. And in the center of it all, Thrak was opening his eyes. The massive warrior's gaze swept the medical bay, taking in the clean, functional equipment, the healthy appearance of his people, the absence of immediate danger. When his eyes finally found Sarah, his expression was unreadable. "Human doctor," he said quietly. "We are alive." "You are," Sarah confirmed. "All of you." Thrak sat up slowly, testing his restored strength. "The hegemony ships. Believe you're dead. We used the ship's fusion charges to simulate destruction while you were in hibernation. They scanned the wreckage and moved on. And now? Now we're heading to a Kithran military base. Your people will take care of you from here." Thrak was quiet for a moment, studying Sarah's face. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the medical bay, including Sarah herself. The massive Kithran warrior bowed his head in formal acknowledgement of debt. "Dr. Sarah Chun," he said in a voice that carried clearly through the bay, "by your actions, you have preserved not only our lives, but our honor. The debt we owe cannot be repaid in a single generation." Around the medical bay, the other recovered Kithrans, warriors, elders, and young ones alike, repeated Thrak's gesture. 15 alien heads bowed in recognition of what the human doctor had done for them. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, though she wasn't entirely sure why. "I was just doing my job," she said softly. "No, human doctor," Thrak replied. "You were doing far more than that." As a medical transport continued toward its destination, Sarah found herself wondering what would happen next. She had saved 15 Kithran lives, but in doing so, she had also revealed capabilities that might change how the galaxy viewed humanity itself. The thought should have worried her. Instead, as she looked around at the aliens she had helped save, Sarah found herself feeling something else entirely. Pride. And a growing sense that this was only the beginning of something much larger than a simple rescue mission. The Kithran military base was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Built into the surface of a massive asteroid, it bristled with weapons emplacements and defense platforms that could have reduced entire fleets to cosmic dust. The docking bays were carved directly from the rock, creating cavernous spaces that could accommodate ships the size of the Blood Talon with room to spare. War leader Korvax had been unusually quiet during the final approach to the base. Sarah couldn't help but notice the increased security as their transport was escorted through multiple checkpoints, each more heavily fortified than the last. "Is all this normal?" she asked as they passed through the final scanner array. "No," Korvax admitted. "Word of what happened has already reached the High Command. Your unique rescue methods have caused considerable discussion among our leadership. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the asteroid's artificial atmosphere. What kind of discussion? The kind that determines whether humans are seen as potential allies or potential threats. The transport finally docked at a medical facility deep within the base. Sarah watched as the hibernation survivors were transferred to proper hospital beds, their treatment now in the hands of Kithran specialists who understood their physiology far better than she ever could. Thrak was among the last to be moved. As the medical team prepared him for transfer, he caught Sarah's arm with one massive hand. "Human doctor," he said quietly, "there are things you must understand about Kithran society. Things that will help you in the days to come." "What kind of things?" "We're a warrior culture, yes, but we're also a culture of debt and honor. What you have done for us, for me, and my people, creates an obligation that extends far beyond simple gratitude." Sarah frowned. "I don't want anything in return. I was just doing what was right." "That is precisely what makes this situation so unprecedented," Thrak said. "In our culture, life debts are sacred. They bind not just individuals, but their families, their clans, their entire bloodlines. By saving us, you have created connections that our society has no framework for understanding. Because I'm human, because you are unknown. Our protocols for life, debt, assume the savior is someone we can repay through military service, political alliance, or economic exchange. But humans are too new, too different. The High Command is struggling with how to respond appropriately." Sarah looked around at the medical bay, where Kithran doctors worked with technology that was centuries ahead of human medicine. "I think I'm beginning to understand the problem." "It is not a problem," Thrak corrected. "It is an opportunity, but it is also dangerous for reasons you do not yet comprehend." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, War Leader Korvax approached with a small entourage of Kithran officers. Their expressions were unreadable, but Sarah could sense the tension in their body language. "Dr. Chun," Korvax said formally, "the High Command requests your presence at a formal debriefing. There are questions that must be answered." "What kind of questions?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Questions about human capabilities, about your medical techniques, about what other surprises your species might have in store for the galaxy." Sarah found herself escorted through corridors carved from living rock, past chambers filled with alien technology and weapons that could probably crack planets. The Kithrans who passed them in the corridors stopped to stare at the small human walking among their military leaders. The briefing room was a stark chamber dominated by a massive table carved from a single piece of black stone. Around it sat 7 Kithran officers, their scales marking them as senior commanders and clan leaders. At the head of the table sat the largest Kithran Sarah had yet encountered, an ancient warrior whose scales had faded to silver with age. "Dr. Sarah Chin," the elderly Kithran said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I am High Commander Vorthak, military leader of the Kithran Defense Force. Please sit." Sarah took the indicated chair, which had clearly been hastily modified to accommodate human proportions. Around the table, 7 pairs of alien eyes studied her with intense curiosity. "We have reviewed the reports of Ship Leader Thrak and War Leader Korvax," Vorthak continued. "Your actions are difficult to categorize within our understanding of galactic politics." "I'm not sure I understand," Sarah said carefully. "You are human," one of the other commanders interjected. "Your species has been in space for less than 3 centuries. You have no significant military power, no advanced technology, no strategic resources that would make alliance with you valuable. Yet you risked your life to save Kithran warriors. Why?" another asked bluntly. Sarah looked around the table at the assembled aliens, realizing that her answer would likely determine humanity's relationship with the Kithran Empire for generations to come. "Because it was the right thing to do," she said simply. The silence that followed was profound. Several of the commanders exchanged glances, and Sarah caught fragments of rapid conversation in Kithran that her translator couldn't parse. "The right thing," High Commander Vorthak repeated slowly. "Not the profitable thing. Not the strategically advantageous thing. Not the politically expedient thing." "Right," Sarah confirmed. "This is what we do not understand," another commander said, leaning forward. "In our experience, species act according to their own interests. Humans should have avoided Kithran affairs entirely. Your involvement makes no logical sense." Sarah took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe logic isn't the only factor worth considering." "Explain." "You're right that humans don't have advanced technology or massive military power. We're new to space, and we're still figuring out how to survive in a galaxy full of species that are older and stronger than we are. Then, why involve yourselves in conflicts that do not concern you? Vorthak asked. Because we've learned something that maybe other species haven't, Sarah said. We've learned that survival isn't just about being strong enough to protect yourself. It's about building the kind of universe you want to live in. The room fell silent again. Sarah could sense that her words were being carefully considered, weighed against everything the Kithrans understood about galactic politics and species interaction. You speak of idealism, one commander said dismissively. Idealism is a luxury for species that have never faced true hardship. Is it? Sarah asked. Because from where I sit, it looks like the realistic approach isn't working very well for anybody. The hegemony attacks whoever they want because they're strong enough to get away with it. Pirates prey on the weak because no one stops them. Everyone spends so much time protecting themselves that they never get around to actually solving problems. And you believe humans can solve these problems? The question carried a note of skepticism that transcended species barriers. I believe humans can help, Sarah said. Maybe not through military force or advanced technology, but through something that seems to be in short supply out here, which is giving a damn about strangers. High Commander Vorthak was quiet for a long moment, his ancient eyes studying Sarah with new intensity. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. You present an interesting perspective, Dr. Chun, but perspectives are easy to express. Actions reveal true character. Tell us about your medical technique, this hibernation process that fooled hegemony sensors. Sarah spent the next hour explaining the principles of induced hibernation therapy, the risks involved, and the modifications she had made to adapt it to Kithran physiology. The commanders asked detailed questions about the technology, the training required, and whether the technique could be taught to other medical personnel. This technology, Vorthak said finally, could save thousands of lives in battlefield conditions. Medical evacuation is often impossible during active combat, but this hibernation technique could stabilize the critically wounded until proper treatment is available. I'd be happy to share the knowledge, Sarah said. It's not exactly a secret. The commanders exchanged more glances. You would share advanced medical techniques with a species you barely know, one asked. Of course, medical knowledge should be available to anyone who needs it, even potential enemies. Sarah considered the question seriously. If sharing medical knowledge prevents needless deaths, then yes. Even potential enemies have children who get sick and soldiers who get wounded. The room erupted in rapid Kithran conversation. Sarah caught words that her translator rendered as unprecedented, dangerous, and impossible. Finally, High Commander Vorthak raised one massive hand for silence. Dr. Chun, you represent a way of thinking that is completely foreign to our understanding of galactic politics. This creates both opportunities and risks that we must consider carefully. What kind of risks? The risk that other species will see Kithran association with humans as a sign of weakness. The risk that your idealism will prove to be naive when faced with true galactic-scale conflicts. The risk that humanity's apparent compassion is merely a mask for more conventional ambitions. Sarah nodded slowly. Those are reasonable concerns. But there's another risk you should consider, which is the risk of missing an opportunity to change how things work out here. The galaxy is full of species that are strong enough to destroy each other, but apparently not wise enough to cooperate with each other. Maybe it's time to try something different. Vorthak was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, and the other commanders immediately rose as well. Dr. Chun, you will remain on this base as our guest while we consider your words and their implications. You will be given quarters appropriate to your status as a savior of Kithran lives, and you'll have access to our medical facilities to observe our techniques as we have observed yours. And then we will decide whether humanity represents an opportunity for a new kind of alliance, or a threat that must be contained before it spreads dangerous ideas throughout the galaxy. Sarah felt a chill at the matter-of-fact way Vorthak delivered what amounted to a death sentence. But before she could respond, the High Commander continued. However, there is something else you should know. The survivors of the Blood Talon have invoked the right of Clethra, the formal declaration of life-debt. This is not merely a personal obligation. It is a binding commitment that involves our entire society. What does that mean? It means, Vorthak said with something that might have been a smile, That regardless of what the High Command decides about humanity as a whole, you personally are under the permanent protection of the Kithran Empire. Any harm that comes to you will be answered by our full military might. Sarah stared at the ancient warrior, trying to process the implications. You're saying I'm untouchable? We are saying that you have earned something no human has ever possessed, the absolute guarantee that Kithran honor will shield you from any threat, anywhere in the galaxy. That's an incredible honor. But what if the High Command decides that humanity is a threat? Vorthak's expression became unreadable. Then we will have an interesting conflict between our collective judgment and our individual obligations. Such conflicts have shaped Kithran history for millennia. And how do they usually resolve? That, the High Commander said, remains to be seen. As Sarah was escorted to her quarters, a spacious apartment carved from the asteroid's living rock, she found herself wondering what she had started. She had saved 15 Kithran lives, but in doing so, she might have changed the trajectory of human-alien relations forever. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as she looked out through the transparent aluminum window at the stars beyond, Sarah found herself hoping that whatever came next, it would be worth the risk. In the medical bay, 3 levels below, Kira and the other young survivors were learning to walk again after their ordeal. They spoke excitedly about the human doctor who had saved them from the dark sleep, their voices carrying through the corridors of the base. Their words were being recorded, studied, analyzed by Kithran intelligence officers who were trying to understand whether humanity represented a new hope for the galaxy or its most dangerous threat yet. The answer, they were beginning to realize, might be both. 3 days after the formal debriefing, Sarah was working in the base's medical facility when the alarms began to sound. The deep, resonant tones that echoed through the corridors sent Kithran personnel scrambling to battle stations, their movements precise and urgent. War leader Korvax found Sarah in the trauma bay, where she had been observing Kithran's surgical techniques while the Blood Talon survivors recovered from their ordeal. Dr. Chun, he said, his voice tight with controlled tension, we need your assistance. What's wrong? Hegemony Task Force, 12 heavy cruisers, and a dreadnought. They're demanding we surrender you for prosecution as a war criminal. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. War criminal? What are they talking about? They claim you used biological weapons against their personnel. The hibernation technique you employed has been classified as an unknown alien weapon system. That's insane. I saved lives. I didn't attack anyone. The hegemony rarely concerns itself with such distinctions, Korvax said grimly. They want you handed over for interrogation and execution. They've given us 2 hours to comply. Sarah looked around at the medical bay, where Kithran doctors worked alongside human equipment she had shared with them. In the past 3 days, the collaboration had saved dozens of lives, creating a fusion of medical techniques that was more effective than either species could achieve alone. What did High Commander Vorthak tell them? That the Kithran Empire does not surrender its honored guests to anyone, for any reason. And now we have a hegemony dreadnought pointing enough firepower at this base to crack it like an egg. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. By trying to save Kithran lives, she had potentially started a war that could cost thousands more. Maybe I should surrender myself, she said quietly. Prevent unnecessary bloodshed. Korvax's expression hardened. That is not your choice to make, human doctor. The right of plethora has been invoked. Kithran honor demands that we protect you, regardless of the cost. Even if it means war. Especially if it means war. Before Sarah could respond, a new voice interrupted them. Thrak entered the medical bay, moving with the fluid grace of a fully recovered warrior. Behind him came the other Blood Talon survivors, including young Kira, whose bright scales seemed to glow with determination. Ship leader, Korvax said formally, you should be in the secure sections. If fighting begins, Thrak interrupted, it will be because someone threatened the life of our debt holder. We have come to offer our services. I don't understand, Sarah said. Kira stepped forward, her young voice clear and strong. Dr. Sarah, you told us you were just doing your job. But we have been learning about human culture from the base computers. We know that what you did was not just medical treatment. It was sacrifice. You risked everything for strangers, added one of the older survivors. In Kithran culture, such sacrifice creates bonds that transcend clan, family, even species. Thrak nodded gravely. The hegemony seeks to punish you for showing mercy. This cannot be allowed to stand. High Commander Vorthack's voice echoed through the base's communication system. All personnel to battle stations. Prepare for possible conflict. Dr. Chun, report to the command center immediately. The command center was a vast chamber carved from the asteroid's core, its walls covered with tactical displays showing the approaching hegemony fleet. Sarah had never seen so much concentrated firepower in one place. The dreadnought alone was larger than most space stations. Dr. Chun, Vorthack said as she entered, the hegemony commander wishes to speak with you directly. Let me guess, surrender or face annihilation? Something like that. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a cold-eyed alien in the severe uniform of a hegemony admiral. The creature species was unknown to Sarah, but its expression of contempt was universal. Human, it said in mechanically precise standard, you are accused of deploying biological weapons against hegemony personnel. You will surrender yourself for trial and execution, or this base and everyone in it will be destroyed. I didn't use biological weapons, Sarah replied calmly. I used medical hibernation to save lives. Unknown alien technology employed in a combat situation is classified as a weapon under hegemony law. Your intent is irrelevant. Then your law is flawed. The alien's expression didn't change, but Sarah sensed dangerous anger beneath its controlled facade. You will surrender within 1 hour, or we will demonstrate the consequences of defying hegemony justice. The screen went dark. Around the command center, Kithran officers worked frantically at their stations, coordinating defensive systems that Sarah suspected were woefully inadequate against the fleet arrayed against them. How many ships can you field? Sarah asked Vorthack. In this sector, perhaps 30 vessels. Most are patrol craft and light cruisers. Against a hegemony dreadnought. He made a gesture that needed no translation. So this base, all these people, they're all going to die because I saved some lives. They're going to die because the hegemony believes might makes right, Vorthack corrected, because they think they can demand the surrender of anyone they choose, anywhere they choose. Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching the tactical displays. Then, she made a decision that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. Put me through to my ship, she said. Dr. Chun, my ship, the Wanderer. It should still be docked in Base 7. Vorthack gestured to one of his officers, who quickly established the connection. Sarah's own voice recognition system came online, confirming her identity. Computer, activate emergency broadcast protocol. Wide spectrum, maximum range. Dr. Chun, what are you doing? Korvax asked. Something the hegemony isn't expecting, Sarah replied. Computer, record and transmit the following message to all human vessels and colonies within 50 light years. She took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either save lives or doom them all. This is Dr. Sarah Chun, currently on Kithran Base 77 Alpha. I am broadcasting this message to any humans who can hear it. The hegemony fleet is demanding my surrender for the crime of saving alien lives using human medical techniques. They have threatened to destroy this base and everyone on it if I don't comply. Around the command center, Kithran officers stopped their work to listen. I want everyone to understand what's happening here. The hegemony doesn't just want to execute me. They want to establish a precedent. The humans who help other species can be hunted down and murdered with impunity. They want to make sure that the next time a human sees someone in trouble, they'll be too scared to help. Sarah's voice grew stronger, more determined. That's not who we are. That's not who we're ever going to be. Humans help. It's what we do. When we see suffering, we try to stop it. When we see injustice, we fight it. When we see bullies threatening innocents, we stand up to them. Dr. Chun, Vorthack said quietly, what are you hoping to accomplish? Sarah smiled grimly. I'm hoping to remind the hegemony why picking a fight with humans is a bad idea. Computer, continue transmission. To any hegemony forces monitoring this frequency, you have seriously misjudged what you're dealing with. You think humans are weak because we choose compassion over conquest. You think we're naive because we believe in helping others. You're about to learn why that's a mistake. New contacts began appearing on the tactical displays. Ships emerging from hyperspace, broadcasting human identification codes. First 1, then 3, then a dozen. Humans are individually weak, Sarah continued. Our ships are small. Our weapons are primitive. Our technology is centuries behind yours. But we have something you don't understand. were willing to die for strangers. More ships appeared. Merchant vessels, explorer craft, even a few military escorts, all converging on the Kithran base. You want me? Come and take me. But know this, every human in this sector is now aware of what you're trying to do. And we're not going to let it happen. The final count showed 37 human vessels arrayed alongside the Kithran defense fleet. Against the Hegemony Task Force, it was still hopeless odds. But something had changed in the tactical equation. Admiral, Korvax reported, we're receiving communication requests from dozens of other species. Apparently, Dr. Chen's message was picked up by ships throughout the sector. What are they saying? They're asking what they can do to help. On the main screen, more ships began appearing. Alien vessels from a dozen different species, all broadcasting peaceful intentions and requests for instructions. Within an hour, nearly 200 ships had gathered around the Kithran base. The Hegemony Admiral appeared on screen again, his controlled expression now showing clear frustration. Human, you have assembled a considerable fleet, but it changes nothing. Surrender yourself, or watch these innocents die for your stubbornness. Admiral, Sarah replied, you're missing the point. This isn't about military strength. This is about what kind of galaxy we want to live in. Pretty words will not stop plasma cannons. Maybe not, but they've already done something more important. They've shown everyone watching that the hegemony's power depends on people being too scared or too isolated to resist. Today, that ends. The screen flickered, and a new voice joined the conversation. It spoke in measured tones of formal diplomacy, but with an underlying authority that made everyone in the command center pay attention. Hegemony Task Force Commander, this is Ambassador Veltar of the Galactic Council. You are ordered to stand down immediately. The Hegemony Admiral's composure finally cracked. This is not council jurisdiction. Wrong, the ambassador interrupted. The moment you threatened to destroy a civilian medical facility for harboring a refugee, it became a council matter. The moment you defined medical treatment as a weapon of war, it became a threat to every species in the galaxy. New ships were appearing on the tactical display, sleek council enforcement vessels with enough firepower to give even a hegemony dreadnought pause. Furthermore, the ambassador continued, the council has been monitoring this situation with great interest. Dr. Chen's actions and the response they have generated represent exactly the kind of interspecies cooperation the council was created to foster. Sarah found herself staring at the display in amazement. What had started as a desperate attempt to save 15 alien lives had somehow become a galactic incident that was reshaping interspecies politics in real time. The Council hereby grants Dr. Sarah Chun full diplomatic immunity and declares her actions to be in accordance with the highest principles of galactic law. Any attempt to harm her or those who shelter her will be considered an act of war against the Council itself. The Hegemony Admiral was silent for a long moment. Then, without another word, his image vanished from the screen. On the tactical display, the Hegemony fleet began to withdraw, their ships disappearing in a hyperspace one by one. In the sudden quiet of the command center, High Commander Vorthak turned to Sarah with something approaching awe in his ancient eyes. Human doctor, he said formally, what have you done? Sarah,